what I want to talk about, the key areas of focus is where sports is now as a content category, how consumers are engaging with sport, and what are the opportunities, but what are the risks of engaging with sport as a digital entertainment proposition. So first of all, in my first slide, I talk about the reality that sport is declining in engagement. So from the point of view of mainstream consumers, sport is less important now than it was in the past. My first slide has a data point where every quarter media tracks consumers watching live TV on TV screens. With the exception of post-lockdown, it's been going down. So it's dropped around about 9% in the last 2 years. So there's a secular decline. Now the next point, which is potentially more problematic, is the demographics of people who are watching live sports. Now, they are consistently older. Just under half of all consumers are 55 plus. Now, if you saw my opening present, well, if you part of the panel that we had yesterday on monetization, you'll remember that I talked about 55 plus as being a very interesting category for streaming and for wider digital entertainment. In this context, the 55 pluses make it around about 45% of live sports TV consumers. They're also the largest in their category, their demographic category for penetration for this behavior. So there's a demographic disconnect with younger consumers disconnecting and older consumers watching and crucially paying as well. So my final slide has a comparison of average spend for subscription video on demand consumers alongside those who watch live sports on TV. And the live sports consumers spend more. So that's the good news story. The bad news story is overall it's declining. As a genre category, and media tracks genre engagement on a quarterly basis in key markets, sport is now outranked by, let me see if I can remember off the top of my head, by the likes of horror, the likes of reality comms. These are higher up in preferences for consumers than sports. So it's a mixed bag. We've got this demographic cliff, we've got older consumers who are predominantly engaging with sports, but they are the ones who are disproportionately spending. So from a monetization perspective, there's something really interesting happening there. The challenge is how do you make sports relevant for those younger demographics is what we're going to discuss in this opening panel. So with that, I'm going to allow our panelists who have opening presentations to do short presentations and to introduce themselves, and then we'll all come up and we'll sit down and we'll begin the panel discussion. Okay, so Eric, would you like to, I'm sorry. Rick, would you like to come up?
All right, immediately go to the next slide, please. Move that on if you don't mind. One more. So I'm Rick Young. I'm the head of global products for LTN. And I'll be very brief, just a quick introduction. We're really excited to be here on this panel today. Live sports is near and dear to our heart at LTN. Everything we do is real-time or live across our portfolio of solutions. We have a global IP network around the world. In case you're not familiar with what LTN is, you can kind of think about us sort of above the line. There's satellite, there's fiber, and there's LTN that brings the reliability, the multicast capabilities, et cetera, that you're familiar with. And then sort of below the line are a whole bunch of protocols out there that allow you to move content around the world, leveraging the internet. LTN brings you all of the opportunities that we've rolled into the network in terms of monetization, in terms of customization, in terms of preparing the content for the right platform, which gets us to what we're talking about here today. LTN Arc, very briefly, is a platform, is a service that allows you to take produced content, specifically sports in this venue that we're talking about today, and monetize it in many different ways. It allows you to reach incredible scale. What we're seeing is in the digital world on OTT platforms and otherwise, these folks really need the tonnage required to drive subscriptions and decrease churn. LTN Arc and our suite of services are really built for that. I won't give you any more of a pitch. I'd love to talk about it more over the next, I guess, 35 or 40 minutes, which is what I'll save for the conversation. So thanks very much. Looking forward to it.
Hi, everybody. Eric Black, CTO and GM of Media for Edgio. For those of you who don't know what Edgio is, and I need to explain this typically at most of my meetings, we were the company formerly known as Limelight, the content delivery network. We've acquired 2 other companies, most notably Edgecast. And with that came a lot of different value propositions, ultimately for our customers and the consumers, specifically in the world of sport. My background, I actually spent my last 22 years at NBC. Most of it as CTO of NBC Sports Digital. And we do a lot of monetization, video streaming, workflow analysis as it relates to sport, Olympics, Premier League, NFL, et cetera. And Edgio is bringing our tool and our suite of systems to our customers to take that to a more global scale. How do we apply workflow for content streaming, preparation, normalization, and distribution to end users? Keyed on the monetization piece of how do we get these to be profitable services, so that drives to engagement and the ad revenue and ultimately subscriber management piece. How do we bring that to our customers? So when we look at Edgio specifically, it's really helping our customers monetize sport and make sure that we're getting the eyeballs that we need to see it. So I'll be very brief in my comments. We'll get on to the Q&A portion, but really excited to be here, so thank you for having us.
Hi everyone, I'm Vinayak Srivastava. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Videoverse. Magnify is one of the products that we have back at Videoverse. We're solving a very interesting problem around key moment generation and highlight generation. We all have been hearing about ways of which content is being consumed these days. Live streaming is a major portion of it, but the young generation today is after the short form content. That's a problem statement that we are solving through our platform. We have a quick video here. I'll take a pause. I'll let you guys just absorb a video here and just give you a quick context of what we are trying to kind of deliver in the market today. Quite excited about talking about the entire journey that we have been going through back at Videoverse and building this. AI is also a topic that everyone's excited about, kind of listening and having a conversation around. Looking forward to the panel, and my panelists here, and obviously we'll try and cover some of these questions around AI and content and monetization.
Okay, so let's get right into it then. So, Eric, what is the future of sports product, of sports production from the point of view of the opening remarks that we just had and Edge's vision for where sports production is likely to go?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this quite a bit in my former job and my current job, which is the future of sport is ultimately multi-platform. Getting to customers on whatever device and whatever methodology that they want to consume it on. So the growth in sports that we're seeing, frankly, and I'll speak a little bit North American based, but declining linear numbers, increased in digital numbers in different types of devices, but a lot of connected devices and OTT devices. How do we make sure that we're getting high quality broadcast video to all of these devices that goes beyond a traditional linear broadcast? What is the engagement model with that? And that may be statistical data, that may be highlight data, that may be sub-clipping, that may be a game cut down, that may be sports gaming, but how does that all come together for a more engaging experience?
Okay, interesting. So, Rick, LTN does a lot of work around optimizing sports production for specific groups of sports consumers. One of the challenges that we have in this new landscape, and Eric's already referenced it with the fragmentation of linear and digital, is how do you address delivering optimal sports experiences for micro communities? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, this is a great panel. The way I sort of see it, and maybe we should have gone in the right order, but leveraging technology like AI, and obviously working with partners on the direct-to-consumer delivery side, like the folks at Edgio. LTN, the way I feel about it, the way I think about it, sits right in the middle. And the question is, how do you decorate, how do you version, how do you customize content at great scale for smaller and smaller audiences, right? You can't invest the same thing you invested 10 years ago for the primary production, for the home broadcaster, for the English Premier League. I mean, that model doesn't work when you're trying to reach niche audiences. So you have to leverage technology, you have to leverage really smart workflows when it comes to the production of the content itself. And then in return, you allow whether it's a region, a part of the world, whether it's a specific platform. Certain platforms are sort of targeted for this age group or that age group. You mentioned in your opening remarks, sort of 18 to 35s do this and 55s and olders do that. And the idea is you need to be able to reach those audiences with the right language set, with the right graphics package, with the right data that surrounds it. And the key is right in the middle when it comes to leveraging technology, but also really smart workflows from experienced people that have done tons of content production.
And how close are we to that being a reality from your perspective? So understanding the challenge is one thing, but then actually being able to offer workable solutions is the next step, right?
It's a reality today. I mean, I can tell you, I mean, we're doing a large projects with, for example, Univision, the VIX platform, Univision's VIX platform, and we're customizing thousands of events every year, soccer, other sports as well, with specific languages, with specific graphics packages for their audience, which is a large and growing audience, but it's a subset of the broader audience. We're doing that today. We have other customers that are replacing certain content in breaks or interstitials that add more value to their specific audience so they can sell subscription services for $10 a month, $20 a month, above and beyond what it costs just to watch the live game. So the reality, I think, is here. It can always get more efficient and the scale can grow over time. But I mean, we're doing it today.
Excellent. So, Eric, and I know there's a lot you want to talk about here and how AI is part of this revolution in sports production. But just before we come on to AI, Eric, there's an area which came up in the pre-panel discussions around IP and the ownership of IP and how that is going to be impacted by this micro focus and this proliferation of content. How at Edgio do you look at IP as being a core part of the production process?
Just to clarify, you're talking about Edgio IP, or you're talking about the content IP itself?
Your client's IP.
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, you look at the sports landscape, rights fees continue to climb, right? IP is only getting more and more expensive, and candidly, whether it's linear distribution workflow or digital distribution workflow, sport is one of the only content types that's event-based viewing. It's something that is time-consumed. I need to be there at 8 p.m. at night. Everything else is being offered in a VOD catalog. A lot of programmers look at it as loss leaders. How do we get you in to watch the football match and ultimately keep you to watch our catalog of VOD content? So the IP, I think, is actually quite critical, not just around the sport itself, but what's the longer tail of IP when we talk about engagement time. We're actually talking about how are you programming your channel. So what is that post-live event opportunity? What are you driving people into? Back in the States, one of the biggest things that we do is, and it's on a broadcast side, is what is that piece of content that you're showing after the Super Bowl ends? That's a really big thing. I actually think it's a really big thing for every sport that we do. So if you think of a Manchester United match, what are you showing right after that? So you're not dropping off that audience. The IP is so expensive, how you monetize that and ultimately package it in different ways. You'll talk about some of the AI bits, but how you package that in different ways, monetize it, offer it to your customers, whether it's in a subscription, whether it's ad supported, whether it's both. I think it's quite critical to get people into longevity and ultimately keep your content service sticky.
It's actually, can I make one comment about that? It's actually an interesting dynamic where live events, I was thinking about your comment around what comes right after the Super Bowl, right? So what we're seeing a lot with a lot of our customers is sort of expanding the event beyond the pre-game, the game, and the post-game. Folks are spinning up pop-up channels, if you will, for a day before the event, building an audience, promoting other VOD assets that might be on the platform, other programming, building up a huge audience, obviously then showing the event, and then keeping that audience engaged maybe for another 24 hours because there's still value in that. So it's really an interesting dynamic where you can extend the life of an event beyond just the event itself.
Well, you talk about events, and it's not just singular events. I mean, if you think of like the world of golf, that could be, minimally, it's a 4-day event. That could easily be a week-long event with pre-produced content and ultimately getting into an event. So 100%. There's a lot of opportunity for extension, and how do you ultimately leverage that IP? It's not just the VOD that surrounds it in your content catalog, but ultimately, I couldn't agree with you more. Extending that event and making it broader is going to be quite critical to leveraging your IP.
Just a quick follow-on that before I come to you, Vinayak. You mentioned the increasing costs of the IP, of securing the sports rights. Now, the recent round of rights deals that have been done around the NFL, for example, significant increase in the cost of the world's most valuable league currently. Are we reaching an inflection point where the IP holders and the distributors have to address the elephant in the room, which is that demographic disconnect between those older demographics? So if I was able to share the slides, I'd be able to show you that there are basically nearly half of all the live TV viewers are 55 plus versus those younger demographics who I'll come on to Vinayak in a moment about how we can engage with them. Is that becoming front and center for your sports clients and understanding what that return looks like going forwards?
Yeah, I would say yes, absolutely. But I think it really speaks to not the cost of the IP, but maybe the cost of the technology that's powering the IP. So if you look at services like Edgio or LTN, where we can package up distribution services, encoding, ad insertion, and monetization, it's frankly really around more of how are you leveraging the IP that you just spent quite a bit of money on. And I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. If you think of sport 20 years ago, you had a 3-hour football match and you were in and you were out. Now it's a long tail content. There are different ways to slice and dice that content. So I actually do believe that there's a way to make this monetizable and ultimately profitable, leveraging third-party solutions and maybe not building 3,000 person engineering teams at every major distributor, but leveraging companies like ourselves to go and bring in technology that ultimately supplement your team. And that's working with your team to make it more cost effective and make these services profitable. I think there's a mix there.
Makes sense.
Great. Vinayak, so this is all nicely leading up to the AI part of this conversation. And one of those areas is clearly customization of content. And I'm thinking specifically along the lines of those younger demographics who we know consume sports in a different way to the older demographics. Could you talk a bit about how you at Magnify look at this opportunity for the customization of sports content and how you use AI to build upon existing practices in sports production to be able to effectively take this into the next generation of sports consumption?
So I think technically the sports consumption has gone through a drastic change in the last few years. Yeah, obviously, you covered a couple of points, and my panelists here were covering the points around how the demography around the 18 to 35 and then the above are viewing content today. At Magnify, we see sports being sliced into different segments now, and the short form content being a major portion of it. Customization playing a very important role because what's happening in today's world is that everyone wants to view content as per what they think is appropriate for them, which means that they don't want to see the same set of content or the same set of highlights that everyone in the world is seeing. The younger crowd today wants to follow specific players in the content, which means that it's very difficult to just generate a generic highlight. Customization becomes very important. And when you're trying to do this at scale and you're trying to do this across not only NFL but IPL, which is the second highest IP sports rights today, you understand that the crowd is looking for shorter format of content and the content that can fit on different platforms, because most of the people that are consuming content are consuming this on their mobile devices, which becomes even more important that the content is being sliced, diced, converted, formatted, and then uploaded for the viewership. Otherwise, anyone with a smartphone can create a content and put it up on social media. And that's when people start losing monetary value for their IP, where they spend billions of dollars in buying these IPs. If they're not fast enough in pushing out the content, and if they have a manual team that's trying to solve for this, it's not really going to benefit anyone. They're going to just be losing eyeballs. They're going to be losing ad revenues. You rather kind of infuse your workflow with AI to create these content faster for the traffic and kind of also for the crowd to make sure that things are just happening at a faster speed. The segment that we are getting into at Magnify, where we have been seeing a lot of changes happening in terms of overall content consumption. The long form content obviously is still the favorite format, but the short form content over TikTok and other platforms has gained a massive momentum. Games today are not consumed, unfortunately, in 3 hours of football game. It's consumed in like literally 10 minutes of your highlight packages, and it's all happening real time. So I think it's going through an interesting evolution, and we're going to see a lot more changes happening in this in the space, I feel.
Just to follow on from that, do you feel that what's happening in dynamic smartphone-centric markets such as India, do you feel that that's where more mature markets such as the US or Europe will inevitably follow in how they consume sports as well?
Yes, I think India as a market is evolving. So a lot of the viewing patterns are kind of getting adopted from the West, which means that the consumptions are changing, with better bandwidth, with better connectivity, and with obviously a lot more mobile first users. The crowd is tending towards a larger format of short form content, which means that people want to continuously consume short form content. The West has already started understanding that the live sports does have a large value, but the younger demography is not going to be following the live sports, which means that they are more inclined towards watching multiple content at the same time, but still keeping tab on the live sports. And I think that viewing pattern change is getting adopted across the globe today. Most of the customers that we work with are going through a similar kind of thought process where they are adopting generation of key moments and highlights using AI so that there is speed to it. But at the same time, they're not trying to solve this only for the tier 1 games. They're trying to now go down and solve it for the tier 2, tier 3 games, which means that they're actually saying we have a ton of footage. Can we start using this in an archival manner, or can we start using this in a way where we can engage the audience and engage the community in different regions, which is an interesting aspect, because if you're having a local tennis match, the possibility of streaming that and making revenue is very low. But if you have a highlight package of it, sure, people will be able to consume maybe a 1-minute content rather than sitting and watching a local tennis tournament. I think that perception change has happened, and that's one of the reasons why a lot more companies are trying to also monetize the tier 2, tier 3 games. The tier 1 obviously has the dollars, but to our surprise, our customer base has suddenly also started attracting customers in the tier 2, tier 3, which is schools and collegiate market, which is very interested towards creating dynamic digital properties that can now start monetizing and kind of start getting ad revenues on the smaller content.
Yeah, the other thing that I couldn't agree more about the sort of short form content, but we're also investing a lot, and a lot of folks in this space are investing in leveraging AI and the data that's available to drive automated, customized versions of the event itself, right? It's not just to create really fast clips, and I don't mean at all to minimize the service. It's what you're doing, it's amazing. But I'm saying we're also leveraging exactly that type of technology to customize content in a way that's attractive to the younger audience. I think we may be slightly overstating, and not to question your research. You didn't have a slide, so I don't really know what's in it. But not to question it, but I think there's tremendous value, especially when you add data around it, gaming data, wagering data. All of a sudden, that target audience becomes more valuable. But using AI to create those versions with content, whether it's different announcers that may not be your traditional sports announcer, but a musician that speaks to a specific segment of the audience talking about a soccer match, is really interesting. And there are ways to do it if you leverage AI. You don't have to throw a full suite of production gear at it. You don't have to throw a full suite of personnel at it. You can make that happen leveraging AI, leveraging data, and then with the ability, obviously, to reach individual users on the delivery side. There's real possibilities there.
Absolutely, and just to build upon that point as well, the younger demographic, our research is not saying younger demographics don't care about sports. What it's saying is they consume in a different way, and I think this is part of the point that you're identifying with Magnify is younger demographics have their own way of engaging with sports. That long form sit down, watch the big match, that doesn't work currently for the majority of younger demographics. By younger, we're really talking about the pre-20s, like 16 to 19-year-olds are our youngest demographic. Less than 7% of them are engaging in live sports TV consumption. And also, there's the other part of this equation, which is the demographic setup in mature markets such as Western Europe and the US are heavily weighted towards older demographics. So younger demographics are engaging less with traditional broadcasts, but they make up less of the population and less of the spend as well. So that's just to kind of clarify kind of our position on that. But I think really interesting points. So I think, Vinayat, the point you've raised about how the cost of access of being able to serve these more, shall we say, niche isn't quite the right word, but these more targeted sports franchises is really interesting. Eric, I'd like to kind of build upon that. From the point of view of working with sports rights holders and helping them deliver their content into market, what does best practice look like from a production point of view? What are the questions you get asked to solve? What are the key metrics that you're looking to be able to solve, to be able to deliver a valuable, ultimately direct consumer experience for your sports clients?
Yeah, I mean, all of this kind of comes together into one central thesis, which is how do we make an event personalized for an individual? Because each individual is going to want to consume an event a different way. Some want a lean-back experience, a live lean-back experience, and clearly there are clear KPIs on what makes a very high-quality stream, how we package that, how you ultimately put ad inserts into it, because most of these sports have natural ad break time. How do you leverage that and monetize that? I think there's a lot of experimentation with our customers in terms of how are we presenting different models against this. And a good example is in basketball, where you're seeing not just full game access, full season access, but full team access, or even final 5 minutes of the game access. Different ways of packaging it. And then I think the last part would be going to where your customer is. So how are you leveraging services like ours and how you deliver and prepare content, one, how do you get that to a first-party service and something that you own versus the syndication aspect of it, of getting it to where the consumer may be, and that may be on a social platform, that may be on Google. There are a lot of different ways to ultimately package and deliver sports, to first and third party services at the same time, still monetizing that content. So back to kind of that point of the rights fees, you really have to exploit your content in all different areas to make sure you're hitting all the demographics that you're talking about and hitting them and monetizing them appropriately. I mean, you have to make back that money to make a profitable service. You don't want to beat them up too much with ads, but there's a healthy balance here.
And also, obviously, it's incredibly complex with someone moving into that space, especially in the OTT context. If I understand correctly, part of Edgio's value proposition is you deliver a level of consultancy, so you give guidance on what's the best way to be able to solve and tackle those issues for your clients?
I appreciate you asking the question, but yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We are known in the content delivery space. We have another product called Uplink that does end-to-end video preparation. One of the main things that we talked about this week and what we're excited to bring forward at IBC is managed services. Streaming video is really complicated and hard. It typically requires 3, 4, 5 different discrete vendors to get a successful stream out into the market at scale and reproducible. Who is the managed service provider that's actually ultimately going to go and run your knock, run eyes on glass to make sure that your events are working the way that you'd expect them to, the way that we would have expected them to at NBC? There aren't a lot of people in market that do this right now. So that's one of the things that we're doing, which is getting into the vendor set, whether that's us or other third parties, collaborating, working together to find issues before they happen, and then managing the events if needed on our customers' behalf.
The other thing that sort of plays into both of these points is, Vinayak made the point earlier that it's not just sort of the top tier NFL, English Premier League, content. It's the wide variety of tier 2, tier 3. I don't even like that term so much anymore because they're all sort of equally monetizable, if you will, right? The rights you pay may be different, but they're equally monetizable. But the key when it comes to the question you asked about sort of how do you prepare the production or what do you need to do from the start is think about what the end product's going to be. And making sure that the content is prepared and produced in a way with the appropriate ISO cameras on the specific athletes, that could then turn into a unique product for the consumer. Make sure that the language tracks are broken out. Make sure that there are clean and dirty feeds. I mean, some of this stuff is pretty old school common sense stuff, but some of the biggest rights holders, the biggest leagues don't think in those terms because they're so used to just getting these big rights deals and they don't have to think about it in these contexts. But if you really plan from the beginning, then that value chain becomes possible. And then I guess the other piece that you kind of have to think about when producing is how do you monetize it and what sort of profile creation when it comes to ad triggers and signaling can drive the downstream experience, whether it's the traditional 2-minute break in the middle of, during a timeout, or triggers that come in during the event, over a specific piece of data. You might, when a goal was scored, you don't have the data, but you identify it via AI. How can that trigger be inserted to put a sponsor logo in the upper left-hand corner? Like you have to think from the beginning to get to the end point, get the unique customization at the end.
Yeah, I would underscore something significant there, which is you talked about, we'll call it the mid-tier market. Those are the ones that frankly absolutely need the help. This is the team that doesn't have a 3,000 person engineering organization. Where is that managed services piece, the experts that do this day in and day out? We're doing hundreds of thousands of events a year. How are we helping a team that may have 1, 2 digital people, a COO, a chief revenue officer? How are we helping them package and be their experts in their corner, not just to set up an event and architect it, but how do you actually see it through and run it day in and day out? We have a phenomenal customer in Canada in the Canadian Hockey League, mid-tier market, but they're doing 2,500 events a year. It's the perfect example of discrete events all across of Canada. How are you bringing that in, normalizing it, getting it out to consumers at the broadcast quality scale that everyone would expect?
The challenge to that is you added a very interesting point. It's easy to get ad revenues for the long-form content when it comes to the tier 1 games that we talk about. But the mid-tier games, there's not much of ad dollar revenues. And that's one of the reasons why they're kind of going towards the short form content because it's easy to monetize.
Right.
You can have that on YouTube Shorts, you can have that on TikTok, you can create highlights and put it up on YouTube and start making ad revenues faster because they're not going to get sponsors or they're not going to get ad revenues to come on the long form content. But and the customers that we have recently signed, one of them being in South Africa, I don't think, now if you look at the South African market, wouldn't have that much amount of ad revenues coming on the long form content. But for them to kind of say, oh, we have 3,000 games happening yearly, and we want to try and monetize those using AI because now obviously we can't have a team of 3,000 people.
Right.
But creating short form content will engage the audience and will make us money. That mindset change has just happened in the sports segment very drastically, where people have realized that it can be monetized if you have the right set of content that can go out to the audience, which means that it needs to happen fast and quick. And anything that you have access to in terms of footage, you can monetize if you know exactly what to do with it.
It's complementary, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think one feeds off the other, right? Neither is more important, but you need both for the complete package, is what it feels like, yeah.
And there's also an additional point there, Vinny, which I find fascinating, is you're saying that there's money on the table to be picked up for sports rights holders in markets where they're not currently generating revenues because of the consumption patterns are so different from the traditional model of sports broadcast.
Absolutely. One interesting thing that we have released recently, it's been live for almost a year now, which is the Google Web Stories. A lot of us go on Google to just check the score of the event that's happening. But very few realize that there's now a turn tile that you can click on, which creates instant highlights for you that you can go and visualize, and you can see the game and you can catch up in real time, which means that there's a game happening, you are not subscribed to the Peacock channel or you're not subscribed to maybe Sky Sports, you can still watch the highlights in real time and catch up with the game, which means that subscribers have understood that there are other ways to watch the game and not always subscribe to an OTT platform to kind of watch the content. And that mindset change has happened because of which the OTT platforms have realized that not everyone's going to come back to the platform to watch the game, and we need to monetize differently. And that's why they have started exploring these opportunities in partnership with Google and the other partners out there, and started earning money off the ad revenues that they get when people are actually consuming these short web stories.
Fascinating. So we're into our final 7 minutes of the panel. The final part of this discussion, I'd like us to kind of think forwards to the challenges and the opportunities of working with sports as an entertainment proposition in the digital landscape. So, Eric, I'll start with you. Are you an optimist about how sports is going to evolve? Bearing in mind we've got these massive rights, we've got a changing, highly flexible monetization model that's currently in place. How do you feel about sports and sports production, and how sports sits in digital entertainment and the broader entertainment landscape over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I've spent the last 25 years of my career in sport, so I am an eternal optimist, and I do believe that. The fact that you have the opportunity for a passionate audience, whether it's a large audience and that's a World Cup, or whether that's an NFL game, versus a mid-tier opportunity, it doesn't actually matter because it's a passionate audience. And when you get that, we as engineers ultimately need to bring forward solutions that are going to tailor to that audience. And what you're hearing, I think, largely from this panel is there are a lot of different ways to touch a customer. There are a lot of different platforms to touch a customer. How we bring that content forward, how you ultimately monetize that content with the ever-changing rights fees and increases in those, that's solvable through technology and ultimately through automation, through workflow optimization, through smart engineering, through pooling of engineering technology. Don't build something that already 5 other people have built. How do we bring that forward to lower the cost of how we distribute this content? And when I just mean distribute, that's all the way from packaging, transport, encoding, the whole value chain. We need to actually start to make these commoditized pieces of workflow with expert services behind them to power these, and then to go generate this with automation to deliver to first and third party platforms, whether that's for monetization on Google or ultimately monetization on Google plus an upsell to a first party service. I think that sport's going to be really, really well and start to drive what you're seeing right now, which is these large OTT streamers, into profitability. I'm quite confident on that.
Vinayak, from a perspective of not having any potential historical legacy connotations around sport and how sport is monetized, how bullish are you about sport as an entertainment proposition over the next 5 years?
Very much. In fact, I would invite everyone to come to our booth. We're at 5C96, right opposite the AWS booth. We feel that sports as a segment, there's a lot more to do. We're just started in this segment, and I think over the next few years, we're going to see a lot more transformation happen around how content specifically is getting consumed. There's a whole new world around AR, VR that is still being discussed around the media industry, and how that will fit into the workflows, and how short-form content is going to be benefiting and probably even kind of doing better than the long-form content in the near future. And sometimes it's just about speed and efficiency. I think it's going to be an exciting mix of how managed services comes in place, plus how technology is kind of being used, and how the entire perception around monetization of content, which we thought was only traditionally by just one or two routes, and just now seeing that there's so many other ways of monetizing content, people changing their perception towards adopting these new technologies, and obviously new technologies by the likes of ours. It's just going to be fascinating to see how much more different versions of the same content can be created. And I think that's the world we are headed in right now.
Thank you. And Rick, final words to you. And bearing in mind, I think one of the most interesting areas this discussion that I've discussed, from looking at it from an LTN perspective, this idea of servicing specific discrete categories of sports consumers. How bullish are you about the next 5 years for sports?
So I better be bullish on the sports market. I'm a product guy, right? So I listen to the market, I follow the market, and allow that to guide us. There's a huge percentage of the growth at LTN is around this specific space. So either, I have no choice but to be bullish in this area. I think there's a couple of points behind that. We've talked about most of them when it comes to automation and driving efficiency and a managed service offering from the glass to the end consumer. That all makes perfect sense. The other dynamic that makes me really excited is that I think the leagues and the conferences and the federations are getting it finally, right? And maybe the US, I'm not sure, is a half a step ahead of this when it comes to non-exclusive deals for the content, right? So it's not just I license my content to an entire market, to an entire country. They're breaking it up in unique and different ways, or maybe even allowing multiple platforms to have the same rights to the same event. It's really interesting when you think about it, because now this whole conversation around customization and communities is really possible. It wasn't possible if I could only watch the game on one channel, right? That's the old way of thinking about it. And we see this trend where exclusivity is gone, and thus the need to do all that we've been talking about really efficiently and reach regions, platforms, but even more niche audiences. This type of consumer, or these, which might only be a 10,000 audience set, right? You can make money if you can affordably reach those consumers, and it's only possible in a non-exclusive world. And that, I feel like that's happening. I mean, the trends are saying so.
Right. And that builds upon what Eric was saying about the serving that middle tier as well. So I think that's a really nice way to wrap this up. Yep. So we are absolutely on time, so that's fantastic. So I'd like to thank all my panelists, Rick, Eric, Vinayak. Apologies for my not being able to share my slide deck. My email is up here, though there is a misspelling in media. It's midiaresearch.com. If you want to email me at tim@midiaresearch.com, happy to share the slides with you. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of IBC.